I am recording, and we're going to start the interview right now. So sit back, feel comfortable. Okay. Tell me your full name.
Neal Donald Parnas.
Parnas. And today is July 30th, 2018, and we are at your home in St. Louis, Missouri.
Yes.
And I'm going to start this interview by asking you, tell me about, first of all, I would like to ask you, what is your birth date? What is your birth date?
April 18th, 1927.
1927, April what?
April 18th.
April 18th. And you were born in St. Louis?
In St. Louis.
Can you give me a background of your family? Where you were born, your parents, what kind of household you grew up in?
I grew up in a middle-class Jewish household. My mother was an Orthodox. My father was nothing. He's Jewish. He was born in Canada. My mother was born in Buffalo, New York. My dad came here when he was a very small child. My mother came to St. Louis when she was like 2 or 3 years old. She was wheeled around in a walker during the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. My dad was born in 1900.
So your mother, what was your mother's maiden name?
Barken, B-A-R-K-E-N. All her brothers either went to school or college. One was going to be a doctor, one was going to be an engineer. My mother and her sisters all went to finishing school. My dad never went through 6 grades. He ended up as a supervisor at Union Electric and had 50 people working under him with a 6th grade education.
What kind of household did you grow up in?
Middle class, always in a Jewish neighborhood. The central corridor of St. Louis.
What was the Jewish neighborhoods of St. Louis at that time?
At that time, for me or
For you.
For me, was a suburb of the city called Clayton and University City. Those are the 2 areas. They're right adjacent to the city limits. Went to the good schools. I myself had a limited Jewish education. I went to Sunday school, went to temple every so often. I was not bar mitzvahed.
You were not bar mitzvahed?
No, I was not.
Why?
I told you. Hebrew, I couldn't.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have an older brother. He was not bar mitzvahed. My younger brother was. Both of them are deceased. My younger brother, I hardly even knew until I came back from Israel. He was 10 years younger than me. By the time he grew up, I was gone.
So the house that you grew up in, it's middle class, Jewish but not really Jewish. Like you guys keep kosher in the house?
No.
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 But you do go to temple once in a while.
Went to temple once in a while. Most of the high holidays, I cannot remember keeping any Jewish holidays. Like I said, my father, he was born Jewish, he was Jewish. Basically, that was it.
So there was no youth movements, there was no...
Yeah, there was AZA, what it stood for, I don't know, but it was a Jewish open fraternity, and I belonged to it for a couple of years, but there was nothing really Jewish other than the fact that everybody in it was Jewish.
So you grew up, your first years growing up in St. Louis, you're actually exposed mostly to the Great Depression. I mean, early 30s. I mean, you're 5, 6, 7 years old, and the situation here is probably very tough economically.
No, that's what I said. My father was a supervisor at Union Electric. We lived very well. My mother had a maid during the Depression because he had the salary. My dad never earned more than $125 a week. That was the most he ever earned. He bought his first car in 1936 for $525 because he got a $500 bonus from Union Electric for inventing something for the billing division. And he put $25 down and bought the automobile in 1936.
So you guys had food on your plates, everything. You guys had what to eat. You guys had what to eat in the house.
Oh, always. Never. My mother's family, we were all very, very close with them. They all had good professions or drugstores, something like that. Only one of her sisters married a Jewish farmer. Had nothing, they came here, and they were very Orthodox.
Okay.
And we spent every Seder, every year with them. And my uncle Morris, he could read the
prayers.
The prayers for the Seder faster than anybody I knew.
And what language did your parents speak? Yiddish to each other or English?
English.
English. No Yiddish in the house because they're both born in America.
Right. But my mother understood Yiddish. My dad.
And you said that your mother came from an Orthodox background.
Yes.
Were her parents Orthodox?
Yes. My grandparents, her mother and father, lived with her brother, who was studying to be a doctor until he almost went blind. And they were very Orthodox, and they were the only ones. But I was very close with their son and spent a lot of time with him. Yes. And like I said, I was Jewish. I got in fights several times because of being a Jew.
Was there any anti-Semitism that you had to deal with as a kid here in St. Louis?
I didn't come witness to it very much because, like I said, we lived in a Jewish neighborhood. University City, the high school was maybe 30% Jewish, and we had 1,500 students. There were other areas that I was on the football team and track team, and when we played certain schools, they made nasty remarks to us. They did not call us U City, they called us Jew City. And when I lived in Clayton, we lived right next to Christian Brothers College, which had become a high school. And they were marvelous to us. They played football games. The priests or brothers would make a hole in the fence so we could all sneak in to watch the games, and got no anti-Semitism from them at all. It was great.
So what, in your eyes, what made you different as being a Jew in St. Louis than other people? I mean, what's your identity like when you're growing up? you're a Jew, but you're an American. You're assimilated. Your family's assimilated. There's no real connect. Is there something that you feel that
No,
you're Jewish?
I was never interested in any. A couple of my friends were not Jewish, boyfriends, but girls. It was only Jewish girls that we went out with, and Jewish affairs, simple things. When my wife came here from Portugal, the family she lived with was very close to an organization called Council House, which was after-school activity for Jewish kids, mainly. And I went there. She lived in the city. I lived 5 miles away from her.
We're gonna get to that in a second. Now, so basically, your childhood here in St. Louis, quite normal American, middle class. You know, you're going to high school with non-Jews, with Jews, but but at home you guys are Jews, maybe not keeping kosher, but there is that feeling.
We knew we were Jewish, period.
Was there any talk in the house about Palestine?
No, absolutely none. Nothing. Like I said, I knew I was Jewish, I felt Jewish, and I fought for it as a kid, whenever it was necessary.
Did you get into some fights?
Fight?
Yeah. Did you
Physically against? Yeah, a couple of times.
A couple of times.
Yeah. One time in high school, like I said, I played football. I had a leather sweater. We went to an affair at a stadium that was a Catholic school. Most of the people in the audience, we were leaving, and some kids that saw me with the U-City leather sweater came up to the automobile. The traffic was stopped to get out of the parking lot and started giving us a bunch of
crap.
What for? And I said to my girlfriend, who later became my wife, we got to get out of here, and I got to find some of our friends. They followed me until I dropped her off. I couldn't find any of my buddies any place. And I wore glasses ever since I was 12 years old. And I got out of the car and I says, let my wife in, my girlfriend in, and we can go from there. I no sooner bent down to open up the door than one smacked me, busted my glasses, and we got into a big fight. She got in the house and let the dog out, their dog, and that was the end of it. So we thought. And then I found that I had ripped the ID bracelet off of one of the boys, and I'll never forget his name, Norman Daly.
Nice Irish name. Nice Irish name.
Yes. And we called every daily in the phone book looking for the one that it was, and found that there was only one that it could have been. And me and my friends went to the house, and he wasn't home. We didn't disturb the parents. And we went back the next weekend, and we found out that he had enlisted in the Army and was gone.
Is there any talk in the house, in your house, about what's going on in Nazi Germany? Do you guys, before the war?
No.
Before the war? Before the war?
Not really, no. My dad was not overly affectionate.
Kind of guy?
Yeah, that he was a great athlete. He was very good to us. But world affairs and things like that, I can't remember them ever being talked about. And even with my Jewish friends, I can't remember discussing anything about the war.
You're 11 years old. Excuse me, you're not 12 years old when Kristallnacht happened in Germany.
Right.
The broken glass.
I knew about it,
Yeah.
but many years afterwards.
Okay. So you were completely.
The war broke out. Me and my buddies, we were 16. We tried to enlist.
In 1941.
Yes, they wouldn't.
Where are you? Okay, I have a question I want to ask you. Where are you when you hear about Pearl Harbor? It's like that classic question, where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
Oh, Kennedy assassinated, I know exactly.
I want you to think about Pearl Harbor. Where are you? You're 14 years old. You're almost 15 years old.
Yeah, I lived in University City in a home that we bought in right just before the war broke out. And yes, we listened to everything there was. We knew what had happened, and we were all gung-ho about it. But there was still no over conversation that I can remember.
Okay, but you do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor? Were you at school? It was a Sunday afternoon. Any recollection of, just out of curiosity, I'm asking.
I don't think I heard about it until later on in the day. It was earlier in the day when it happened there.
Yeah.
I don't know what time it was here, but probably that evening, listening to the news, it was the first that we really knew about it.
And do you realize as a 15-year-old what this means?
No.
No.
Did not really realize. I was gung-ho American. I thought there was no greater country in the world than America, and we'd lick their rear end before a couple of weeks went by. I had no idea anything about it. And then I became very much involved, and I collected. Well, when I was younger, my dad always brought me a present, and I was into toy soldiers and toy cannons, and I used to have fights at 10, 12 years old with the toy soldiers in the gangway of where we lived. But then when Pearl Harbor happened, I really got interested in knowing what was really going on in the world.
So it did open up your knowledge to what's happening in the world.
Correct.
Yeah. You realize that there's an evil and that there's a good and that there's...
Absolutely, yeah. Until then, like an upper middle class, hey, get up.
Yeah, we're going to have to do
Get over here.
Yeah.
Now stay.
Hold on, please.
You know, upper middle class, you know,
Life is good.
yeah, we had a good life. Depression never meant, like I said, never meant anything to us. My mother had a maid during the Depression,
Yeah.
even though we lived in an apartment.
Yeah.
And didn't know what it was to go hungry or to suffer from bullies or anything like that. It was a great life.
What do you remember about how the war changed the mood in the country? Like, do you remember, like, before Pearl Harbor and after Pearl Harbor? After Pearl Harbor, you say you're gung-ho. You want to join the army.
We tried everything, couldn't get in anywhere. And we didn't want the Army, we wanted the Navy or the Marines, but the Army, no.
No? How come?
No, we just didn't feel like it. What did we know? When we were turned down by the two of them, you know, we figured that.
Hold on a second. I'm just shifting here for a sec. There we go. That's much better. Wait a second. Let me just fix the focus here. Hold on. I'm sorry, I just had a little technical problem. We are continuing. So the war breaks out, 1941, December 1941.
Right.
You told me that you and your friends had, you know, you're too young to enlist,
Right.
but you would like to. And you'd like to be in the Navy,
Yeah.
not in the Army.
Yeah.
Is the Army bad? Is the Army not good? Or like, what's the deal?
I just didn't think it was good. I think we were just playing around more than, you know, we knew.
Did you really try to enlist?
No, we went down there and we talked to them, and they told us we were too young, and that was it. I wasn't drafted until after the war was over.
Right.
And I was classified 4F because I had
Glasses
and a hernia, and I wouldn't let them operate on it. So I was classified 4F. My brother and all my cousins
Yeah, what about them?
served. My brother, he witnessed some anti-Semitism when he went into service. He was in a camp in, I think, Texas. And he goes in to take a shower, and he sees all the guys looking at him, and they wanted to know where his tail was. All Jews are supposed to have had a tail. But it didn't affect him in any other way in the Army. He had it fairly good. He was a clerk, and that was it.
So, when did you graduate high school?
1944.
1944.
Yes.
June 44, probably?
No. January, I was the last mid-year graduation class at University City High School. There was only 95 of us. Normally we had 400 to 500 graduating.
And this is because of the war, probably.
No, it was the last mid-year class. Yeah, they were phasing it out.
You were telling me earlier about your wife.
Yes.
When did you meet her?
I met her in late 46. I met her with some, she lived with a family that had 3 other girls, and I was going over to see one of the other girls, and I met her, and when she graduated in 47, I believe it was, I was her date for the prom. I gave her an ankle bracelet.
What was her name? What was her name?
Her name was Raquel Wax.
That was her maiden name?
Her maiden name. She was born in Poland in 1930.
So she was younger than you?
Yes, 2 years younger.
2 years younger?
And
So when you get out of high school, are you already dating?
Yes,
You
yes.
guys are going steady?
More or less.
More or less.
Yes, I had a track scholarship to the University of Missouri, And I had a Friday class, and every Friday class during the winter, or any time, I would hitchhike to St. Louis to see her before she left, the year that she was leaving. And I told her that I'd see her in Israel.
Well, when the war ends, do you go into college immediately?
Yes.
You go into college.
Yes.
Where are you going? You're going to study engineering, is that correct?
Yes, civil engineering.
Civil engineering. Civil engineering.
Yes.
And the reason that you're not going into the Army is because of your medical condition.
Correct.
Correct. What university do you apply to?
I went to the University of Missouri. And Mizzou had a good engineering school, so I figured that would be a good place to go. Plus the fact I had a limited athletic scholarship.
What sports were you playing? Football?
Track.
Track.
Yes.
Track.
I was a quarter miler, and I forgot his name, but one of the track members of the team ran in I think it was the 48 Olympics as a marathon runner. Mm-hmm. And I was almost as good as he was in the 440. So, but I left school, went to New York.
Why'd you leave school? No, I wanted to ask you something. Raquel.
Yes.
After she finishes high school.
Yes.
She goes to Palestine.
Yes.
Why?
Because her parents, an older brother of hers, half-brother, was left in Poland during the war. A friend of her mother and father's went to Israel, and lo and behold, saw the son there in Israel. The parents knew absolutely nothing of what happened to him. And they came back to Portugal. He came back to Portugal and told Bluma was her name, the son's mother. And they packed up and left immediately.
They left Missouri.
Left Portugal. To find the son, right.
Palestine.
To go to Palestine.
Raquel
was here graduating. The minute she graduating, her parents said, "Join us."
In Palestine.
Right. And
how do you feel about that? You guys have been dating already for how long?
Almost a year. I felt that I ought to see her and see Palestine at the same time.
So Raquel leaves to Palestine.
Yeah.
Do you remember saying goodbye to her? Or do you remember
just normal.
Yeah.
Nothing over affectionate or anything. I gave her an ankle bracelet, which I found out later on when I went to Israel, that an ankle bracelet in Israel meant a prostitute.
Oh, God. Oh, well.
So, needless to say, she quit wearing it quite
quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I went to New York to see what I could do to get to...
We're going to get to that in a sec. So you finished your first year of college, is that correct?
Half year.
You did one semester. One semester.
Yes.
And then you...
During the summer vacation, when school was out, me and a friend of mine went to New York to try and get on in the Merchant Marine.
Explain to me what the Merchant Marine is. I don't understand what it is.
Merchant Marine is sailors on any ship other than a warship. It's part of the Coast Guard. I have Coast Guard papers. And you're listed as, there's 3 divisions in the Coast Guard: engine, deck, and steward. I finally got into a steward union, got on a ship, and became a sailor
Now, why did you want to become a merchant?
to see if I could get to Israel.
Why do you? Okay, so that's what I want to ask you. Do you want to go to Israel? Do you want to go to Israel? What year is it? What year are we talking about? 1946? 47.
Yes.
So you understand what's going on in Palestine.
Yes.
You know what's happening there.
Yeah, a little bit.
A
yes.
little bit.
Yes.
Is your motivation to go to Palestine to see Raquel or to
Both.
fight the
Adventure, to see Ray and find out what is going on. The ship I got on made a North Atlantic cruise to France, England, and Norway. When I got back to New York, my buddy had gotten on a ship to the Mediterranean. We got back, he went back to Mizzou. I transferred to his ship, the ship that he was on. Israel had not become a state yet.
right?
We made a stop in Cairo, Egypt.
Do you remember the name of the ship?
No, all I know is it was an American troop transport, C-4, that was taken mainly soldiers' wives and back to the States. But it was running as a passenger ship.
So you go from New York
To
Cairo,
Cairo,
Lebanon, you said?
Lebanon, and Marseille.
You're so close to Palestine, but you don't get there.
Excuse me, we did stop. Yes, we did stop. Yeah, we did stop in Haifa. We did stop in Haifa for half a day. And that recalls something that happened. I almost didn't make it. We went to Lebanon first, and then back to Haifa on the way out of the Mediterranean. And when I was in Lebanon, I made a phone call to Israel.
To whom?
To the post office or whatever, I don't even remember where it was. They did not have a phone. Her parents had a cafe.
Raquel.
And there was no phone there. There was no phone. The only phone close by was in the post office right across the street. And you had to set up time to meet, to talk to each other. And I told them that I was on the ship, and that was it.
Who'd you tell?
Somebody that knew the family.
Of Raquel.
Yes.
So you're basically trying to call her.
Yeah, she was in the Army.
She was in the Army.
Yeah, halfway across the Atlantic, on the ship,
That's on the other voyage.
on the second voyage,
Yeah.
Israel was proclaimed a state. We took down the Panamanian flag and flew an Israeli flag. The chief steward, the captain were not Jewish. There was a few Jewish sailors on the ship. One of the main person on the ship, I think his name was Adon Grisham.
Well, but wait a minute, I'm a little bit confused. Because you told me that you guys went to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am getting confused.
Yeah.
I am.
You go back to the States again.
Yeah. I'm
Right.
forget.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
On the second ship, it was still an American ship. Everything, all the way through it,
So you go to Cairo, you go to Lebanon,
and then to Haifa,
and then to Marseille.
Marseille, and
then
then
back to the
back
States.
to New York.
Okay. So this is already your second voyage as a merchant ship. So
Correct.
You're experienced. You got.
Right.
You know what to do.
Right.
What happens when you get back to New York?
When I got back to New York, I stayed there. I did not go back to school, and I tried to find how to get to Israel. There was a huge affair in New York all about the founding of the State of Israel. There was a huge, like 20 feet long map in relief of the country of Palestine, showing what was going to the Jews and what was going to the Arabs. And from that I found the partition. I found out there was an organization called Land and Labor for Palestine. And this was before, when I got back, before the state was founded. And I went to this organization, not having any real Jewish affiliations. They didn't even want to talk to me. I was sitting in the waiting room waiting to get an interview with somebody of importance. In Manhattan. And two big guys walked past me, went into the office, didn't close the door, and I'm listening to what they're saying, and they tell the guys that they've got a drum of weapons of oil they want it put on the ship that is being bought by the Jewish agency. I heard this. When they called me in, I said, I heard all that. Let me on the ship. Get me on the ship. And they did. And I went to the ship where it was anchored.
What was the name of the ship?
The Samuel Johnson. It was built during the early part of 1900 as a flat-bottom river gunboat. It had an American clearance only to be a coastal vessel during World War II, and they spent millions of dollars reconditioning it, putting new apparatus, especially a gyroscope, which was to keep the boat level in rough weather, which didn't work. That's the ship we bought. While I'm on that ship trying to get it ready to sail, a sightseeing boat on the river in New York Harbor came so close we could hear the person telling everybody on the ship that that's a really not a Panamanian ship, it's a Jewish ship, and it's going to Palestine. And that we're flabbergasted. Supposed to be a big secret.
Yeah, your cover's blown.
Yeah.
So what happened? What do you guys do?
Nothing. Nobody bothered us.
What kind of weapons did you guys have in the boat? What kind of weapons? What kind of weapons?
We knew not. No, the boat itself had no weapons. In the cargo hold was drums or boxes. How much weaponry, I don't know.
What was in the boxes?
Probably rifles.
You never saw them though?
Never saw anything. The only reason we knew was because we heard these guys in the office.
And who were these guys? Jewish?
They were from the Palmach.
From the Palmach.
Yeah. That's what I learned later.
Sure. And they were big guys, you said? Big guys?
Very. Well, I'm small, so everybody's big.
So, do you remember, so it's called the Samuel Jackson?
Yes, that was the name of the ship.
And you sailed under a Panamanian flag?
Under a Panamanian flag. And I learned after we sailed that there was 2 sailors on there, American, that had been on the Exodus and had been interned
in Cyprus.
On Cyprus.
Now, just again so your motive, you have two motives to get to Palestine.
Right.
One is romantic,
Yes.
and the other one is
Adventurous.
it adventurous and to help the cause.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
Do you remember when you guys so you're setting sail from New York Harbor
Yes.
and you go from New York to Marseille?
No, we never made it to Marseille that I can remember.
Okay.
We stopped a Portuguese island just before you entered the Mediterranean.
Not the Faroe Islands. I forget the name of the islands.
Yeah, I do too.
I know exactly what you mean.
We stopped there, and that was when Israel was become a state, and they
So that was May 15th, 1948.
right,
That's when you get the news that Israel declared its independence?
right.
What happened? What's the mood on the boat?
They sent us. The mood was great, but half the boat was not Jewish. Half of the crew. Anyway, we went to Constanza, Romania.
From the islands off of Portugal.
Yeah, through the Mediterranean to pick up Jewish immigrants. The idea at that time was to get as many young Jews as they could into now Israel.
So Constanza is a Romanian city on the Black Sea.
See, right,
And these immigrants are not just immigrants, these are Holocaust survivors.
right. They were all young, 90% of them. Romania was Russian controlled. While we had shore leave, I was with somebody and I happened to mention that the Russian soldier had an awful nice fur cap. So the person I was with said, "I'll get it for you," which she did, needless to say.
You still have it?
I wish I did. One of my future brother-in-laws, when we got to Israel, took it.
You took it? Yeah, one of your future brother-in-laws? Yeah, one of Raquel's brothers?
Yeah.
Yeah?
So anyway,
I want to ask you about your how long were you in Romania for? How long were you guys docked on Constanza?
less than a week and more than 3
Is
days.
there anything that you remember about seeing these Holocaust survivors? Do you remember any impression it left on you, or?
The impression I got was wonderful that there's still young Jewish people left. And we were taking them to Israel. The women said that they went through hell to get on the ship. They were stripped down, their private areas were examined for hidden money, jewelry, anything they could have kept to try and survive. And it was just a good feeling. I don't know what to say.
And you were very much aware of that moment at that
Yes.
time. You were aware of what you were doing, what you
Yes.
were part of.
Later on, at a future time when I was in Marseille, we took some immigrants that I think they came from Italy.
Most likely.
Jews from Poland and from Germany, and they had to separate them in the camp. They hated each other. German Jews,
And Italian Jews, and Polish Jews.
Polish Jews. From what I learned, the German Jew was not very popular.
No?
Even though Israel had a huge German Jewish,
30s.
yeah.
Yeah.
But That was the only thing I found out about.
Now, from Constanza, you guys sail
Back to Israel.
to Israel, which is now a state.
Yes.
Do you remember arriving at the coasts? Did you guys dock in Haifa?
We docked in Haifa. Haifa was the only
Right.
dockable city.
Roughly, how many refugees were on your boat that you picked up in Romania? Roughly, 1,000?
Over 1,000.
Over 1,000.
Yes. We had 3 huge 100-gallon vats that we cooked the food. I had to get the food that we could put into a mop pail for every 25 or 30 people. That's how we fed them on the ship. We had limited facilities for feeding that many people.
Do you remember any problems on the voyage?
None at all. No, I take that back. I take that back.
Please.
We had the only problem was we had one of the toilet rooms had problems, and I grabbed 3 or 4 of the immigrants, gave them a mop and a bucket, and told them to get it cleaned up, and they didn't like it. they called me anti-Semitic and everything else because of that. But that was the only problem we ever had on the ship, which was very limited.
Do you roughly remember the date that you guys got to Haifa?
No,
No.
I really don't.
Okay. But you get to Haifa. The immigrants, the Holocaust survivors, go into the country, right?
Yes.
They what do you do?
I hitchhiked to Tel Aviv. In Tel Aviv, I found out that there was a place where all the soldiers gathered to pick up trucks that would take them home, take them wherever they had to go, and I wanted to get to Rehovot.
Now you know that Raquel is in Rehovot?
I know that.
Now,
No, I don't know. I know that's where her family was.
okay. But
She was in the army.
There's a war going on now.
Right.
You're there. There's a war.
Right. So,
Just a second. Okay. So you hitchhike to
Rehovot, and the truck was loaded, and wherever you passed a area that anybody on the truck wanted to get off, they would yell out, and they'd bang on the top of the truck so the driver would slow down and you'd jump off. I'm standing there, they're talking to me in Hebrew, and I don't understand, and I yell, Rehovot, Rehovot, Rehovot. They drove about 5 miles past Rehovot before they let me out. I had to walk back, and I found out my in-laws had a cafe called Cafe Hadarom.
Cafe?
Cafe Hadarom.
Hadarom, south.
Yes. And I went there and I found out that Ray was...
Is that what you called her, Ray?
Yeah.
It was her nickname that you gave her?
Yes.
Ray?
And she and her father were at an outdoor concert. And I went to where it was, and the guy at the front gate, ticket booth, whatever, asked me what I wanted, and I explained to him, and luckily he spoke English, and he knew Raquel. And he said, she's in the last row, of the first promenade. You walk on the, and you can't miss her. And he showed me, and I went up there, and I'm walking along there, and I tap her on the shoulder. She's sitting there knitting. And I tapped her on the shoulder, and she turns around, looks at me, and jumps up screaming. Needless to say, we walked out, and that was it. So that's how we got back together. And then I was put on, I had to go back to the ship, and I transferred to another ship that was a passenger ship. I think it was called the Galila.
An Israeli ship?
Yeah.
An Israeli ship.
Right. They had acquired others. The Samuel Johnson, I think, was renamed to the Galila.
Okay, so it's the same ship you're going on, but just a different name.
No, what was it?
I wanted to ask you something about your reunification with Raquel. Now you meet her family. You met her family now.
Yes.
So they heard about you.
Yes. They had.
And how was it? How was it not only to see her, but also to meet her family? And you're with her now in Palestine, in Israel.
Yeah. I really can't remember it. It must have been great because everything went well. They accepted me, and I stayed overnight and had to leave the next morning. And she had to leave because she was in the Army. And I did not, well, one of her brothers was here in the States when she came.
Yeah.
I knew. His name was Zev.
Wolf.
Wolf is in English,
yeah.
But he never went by Wolf. He always went by Zev. And the older brother, Mike, I had not met. And I hadn't met him that first trip because they were already in the Army and not in Rehovot. And like I said, I left, her father spoke a half a dozen languages or more, but English was not one of them. So we had no way of communicating except by gesture or what have you.
Were they nice to you, her parents? Were they?
Very.
They accepted you?
Correct.
So the next morning, you go back to Haifa. You go back to your ship.
Yes.
Now, you're no longer a U.S. merchant sailor. You're done with that. You're now on your own.
Yes and no. On the ship was the gentleman from Israel. I think his name was Adon Gershon, that belonged to Kafai Giladi,
sure.
a kibbutz in the northern Galil. He said, are you staying in Israel? And I said, yes. He says, then you have to be a member of something, or I'm going to make you a member of Kafai Giladi. I had never seen the kibbutz. I had never there until many years later when Ray and I went back for a visit. We went to the kibbutz. And
you're a member of.
Yes, and he had passed away.
Okay.
And then I was made an assistant chief steward on another ship. I think I was chief steward. I don't even remember anymore. Anyway, I had a cabin to myself, and I was an officer, and we were making trips between Israel and Marseille. That's the boys.
So the ship that you're on now, here, sit back. Sit back, yeah, there we go.
Sit.
The ship that you're on now, so you're doing voyages between Haifa and Marseille.
Yes.
Are these for picking up more refugees?
By this time, we're not, we're picking up regular passengers.
Regular passengers.
Yeah, in fact, at that time, Chaim Weizmann was the president. He was on one of the trips.
Really? Did you meet him?
Yes.
And what can you tell me about your meeting with him?
I appointed one of my best friends that was a Holocaust survivor that I had met when we picked up one group of the immigrants. And he was made the chief, Chaim Weizmann's valet. He went in there one morning early to start to clean, and he found Chaim Weizmann on the floor cleaning the bathroom floor.
Get out.
He grabbed him and told him to get to bed, and this is the way he told it to me. Chaim Weizmann bawled him out. He says, "Young man, I want to tell you, it's a poor person who can't clean up his own mess, no matter what it is in life." And he let him finish cleaning, and that was it.
Did you actually meet him physically?
Yeah, when he got on the ship, all I did was say hello to him and told him. I had no conversation with him. No, it was the same thing. I don't know where I met him, but the Air Force general with
Ezra Weizmann?
No, with the patch on his eye.
Moshe Dayan.
Moshe Dayan. I met him someplace also, and just to shake his hand and say hello.
During 48, during that time?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Now.
And I learned it was, I know why there was an awful lot of American pilots over there, both Jews and non-Jews. Sure. And they ran into some problem, and he bawled them out, and they said goodbye, and they're on their way to Haifa to leave the country.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and till he apologized to them, and they came back.
Maybe they did something wrong. Now, during
it was wrong only in the eyes of the Israelis. Sure. It was like horseplay, that kind of stuff. Yeah. The Americans were full of it.
Exactly. Now, so you're doing these voyages between Marseille and Haifa. You're doing a few of them, or just one, or?
I only made a couple.
Okay, but when you come back to Israel, are you staying with Raquel, or are you guys?
When I came back to Israel, every time I would talk to her if she's in town. It wasn't over a long period of time, only several months.
The war.
Yeah, and I left the ship, came back, and we discussed marriage. And that's another. Yeah. I was still in the Merchant Marine, in the Israeli Navy, and they had purchased another ship that was in dry dock in Venice, and they needed, and the only ship going to Europe was going to Marseille, so they needed people that had means of going from France to Italy.
On land.
So because I had an American seaman's papers, hard to say, Coast Guard, they put me on the ship, and they sent me and another American to
Venice.
to Venice.
Marseille?
No,
And then from Marseille
to Venice. We passed the border by we get to Venice to the ship, and 2 days later, while we're refitting the ship, the Italian police came and asked the captain for Neal, Parnas, and I forgot the other guy's name. They say we crossed the border illegally. They told them they don't know us, we're not there. So, and that was the ship that was, it was very small, but it was a more like a passenger ship for better people, and that's the one, we took it back to Israel, and we were carrying people from Israel to Marseille, and from Marseille back to Israel. On one of the trips, from the type of passenger, I'm saying this to tell you, there was a family, and they had 2 daughters, of course, and I got very friendly with one, and they were paying passengers that went to Israel. And we had, at that time, it's coming back to me slightly, we had hammock spread in the hole where luggage and stuff was, and what do you call it? The immigrants that were Holocaust survivors were brought back to Israel.
So there was a more
Yeah, that yeah, and we even had extra mattresses on the boat, and I'd roll them up with a sheet and a blanket and a piece of rope, and they could go up on deck and sleep any place they could find. And that's how we brought back some more passengers, more immigrants. When I finally got I only made one trip like that, and then that's when I left. This was the ship that we picked up in Venice and brought back to Israel.
Do you remember the name of the ship?
Cadmore, I believe that's what it was.
And it has an Israeli flag.
Yes, we flew the Israeli.
So are you in the Israeli Navy at this time?
Well, that's what they called it. The Navy consists.
Do you ever have an Israeli Navy papers?
No. Yes, I do, and I have a copy of it someplace, and I can't find it. The actual military or passport that I had that said I was a chief steward, an officer, when they wrote the thing in the book Zion in the Valley, Eric, the author of that book, interviewed me right here, and he took the passport and a couple of other personal things, and I never got them back.
What do you mean, you gave it to him?
I didn't know he had taken it.
So he stole it?
I guess, everything was laying out. I was young and innocent. I didn't think things, happened. I didn't know it was that important.
So, in 1949, the war ends. Are you the War of Independence ends in 1949.
Right.
basically.
In 1949, Ray and I and her family were talking marriage.
Right.
We had already begun talking marriage before that. And that's when I was sent to Marseille to pick up this boat in Venice. They were sending out invitations for an engagement party.
Okay.
They owned like a cafe, a restaurant, and it was going to be there. And I didn't tell them I was going. And Ray called off everything when I got back. She was madder than can be because here they got all these friends and everybody coming and know me. So anyway, we sat down and discussed it after I left the ships. And we did finally get married.
Where did you guys get married?
In Rehovot.
In Rehovot.
Yes.
Now, does your family know about this?
No.
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 Your parents, nobody knows.
No. Nobody knew. I sat down with the rabbi. That's another story. Sitting down with the rabbi, my father-in-law, he had not been involved in a marriage before in Israel. And the rabbi started for the ceremony and everything. They wanted 50 pounds or something like that. Anyway, Abba and I were very pleased. We got him down to 25. And when we told Yaakov, Ray's half-brother, that had already been married in Israel, and he was at the wedding, and we told him about it, he says, that Jew got you. He says, the going rate's only 20 pounds. So we had a big to-do about that. We thought it was great. We were married by 3 very Orthodox rabbis. I learned 10 words in Hebrew that I had to speak, and something that had to be read from the Torah. My father-in-law had to pay someone to do it for me. And he had to find someone who had been to the States and can verify that I had never been married before.
How did they do that?
And of course, my wife had to go to the mikveh. My father-in-law paid $18, had the thing drained and re-scrubbed and refilled before he'd let his daughter go
in there
in the mikveh to be past that she had, for whatever reasons. I don't know what all the reasons. Anyway, that was it.
Hold on a second. So what year did you guys get married? 1949?
50.
1950.
Yeah.
So you spent time actually in Israel after, were you working on the ships or did you do something else?
No, I was
living in Rehovot.
I was living in
Were you living with
Rehovot.
them?
Huh?
Were you living with
I
them?
was living with them. I ran the cafe for a while, sent my now parents on a vacation while I ran it.
You sent your mother and father-in-law
Yes,
on a vacation?
on a vacation. And that's another story. Everything was rationed in Israel.
It was a very hard time.
Yeah, and we served a lot of fish. I went to the market to get our fish, and I didn't understand them, and they didn't understand me, and we're yelling back and forth. And I grabbed one of the fish, and I was gonna whopped the guy for not giving me more rations. So they called me the crazy American, which is all right with me. I didn't care.
Bother you.
Yeah. But when my in-laws came back and found out my father-in-law, my mother-in-law was more lenient and more outgoing. My father-in-law, I shouldn't have done that. So anyway, that was another thing. And then when they came back, I had an American Union card. I was a carpenter. And I had worked in a mill in New York while I was waiting to get a ship. And Israel was looking to have union connections and all that. They were very socialistic at the beginning,
Yes,
as everybody knows.
Of course, yeah.
The kibbutzim and the Russia.
Until 1977.
Yeah. Czechoslovakia, we had a lot of Czech guns and so forth there.
So you worked as a carpenter for a while after that?
I worked as a carpenter in a little shop that made windows and doors. And I was sent to an army camp to help build some buildings, install the doors and windows that we had made. Every morning they'd pick us up at 5 o'clock and drive us into the Negev to the camp. And it was the only place where they had toilet paper and people didn't.
It was a very rough time.
Yeah.
It was a very rough time in Israel, the 50s.
Yeah,
Everything was rationed.
I'd go in the officers' quarters and steal the toilet paper from the bathroom to take back to Rehovot.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Yeah, little things come back to me that I had done.
And what year did you and Ray decide to come back to the States?
Shortly after that,
Did you-
in 1950, the end of 1950.
It was decided that
Like I said at the very beginning, language and me don't get along. I have a hard time even speaking English.
you're doing pretty well.
I could not pick up Hebrew, never did. All the time I was there and on the ships, I was an officer, so most of the crew could all speak English as well as every other language. So they all talked to me, everybody talked to me in English. And I never did learn. I had great opportunities. Another French Jew that came from a very wealthy family had connections in France. We were going to start a truck company. He could get British and French lorries from the World War II that were in surplus. And we got about 3 or 4 other guys together and we were trying to save our money. This was while I was still on the ship.
Yeah,
And
you knew the ship thing wasn't going to last forever.
yeah, and nobody saved their money except myself and another guy. So that fell through. Then when in Rehovot, there was the most wealthy man there came into their cafe, and he was the head of a community center where they played soccer and they had a swimming pool and a gazelle stand. And he said, if you could get a filter for the swimming pool, I'll give you a 99-year lease to run the place. And on a Saturday, whenever they played soccer, 1 or 2 days a week, that little gazelle stand made so much money, I could have lived like a king. And the only thing I could get was my parents were willing to give us passage from Europe back to the States.
Your parents?
Yes, my family. And that was another, I really didn't pressure any of it because of the language barrier. I read the Jerusalem Post, which was in English, and that was it. And it was one-sided, you know, and like everything else. And I'll tell you, when before we were married, Ray left the Army and was in nursing school. And I'm sitting in the waiting room waiting for her to get off, and I'm reading a Reader's Digest from the early 1930s. And there was a little, you know, at the bottom of several pages, they had little comic
Strips.
Things that happened, and you know, and I was reading one of them, and one of the things they said, that the problem in Palestine was that the Jews had too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And I thought that was very
Accurate.
correct, very accurate. Everybody was a chief and nobody was the Indian. So anyway, we got married in 1950, and we lived there for 6-8 months after we were married, and then came back to the States. And my parents had sent me the tickets for the Mauritania, which belonged to the Cunard Line, the same as the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, a smaller ship but fabulous. And we got to Marseille, free for nothing, of course, because of the ship, the Israeli ship I had been chief steward on. We get to Marseille and we find out that our passports are not valid because of the McQuarrie Act, which went into effect, and you had to prove you were not a communist.
Okay.
Which I didn't say. The Israeli consulate general was supposed to be present, I don't know if at the wedding, to certify that an American citizen. I carry a dual passport, Israeli and American. Anyway, one of the comments he made to me was that all of you volunteers, you come this close to going over the line, but you never go over that line.
A lot of people had that problem.
Yes.
A lot of Americans who volunteered had that problem.
Right. And we get to Marseille on a Saturday, and of course nothing was open that was Jewish. And Sunday, the next day, nothing was open because of English. So we were in a not in Marseille, sure, the French port on the, I can't think of the...
Nice, the city of Nice?
Probably,
Nice, Marseille.
Yeah, I don't remember. Okay. Anyway, wherever the Queen Mary and the Mauritania docked in France, that's where we went, waiting to get our released for Ray. I was fine. That was no problem. It was her. So anyway, we went in a little hotel on the waterfront, and the walls were paper thin, and needless to say, we find out that every time Ray went anywhere near the door, too much was happening. You could hear the bed squeaking and everything else next door. When we finally got the okay, the Mauritania had sold, so the passage we were
supposed to get.
Yeah, to the Queen Mary. We returned on the Queen Mary to New York. And that's where my mother and father got involved. I had the money for the Mauritania, but we didn't have enough to cover the Queen Mary, and my parents' radio wired it to us so we could get the ticket transferred to the Queen Mary. And we made it back to the States. That's it. Been here ever since and created 4 daughters, 10 grandchildren, and 13 great-grandchildren. And a dog. Always a dog.
And your connection to Israel has always been firm and strong? Or?
Yes. I helped bring both of her, Zev, back to the States here, and her brother Mike, her older brother. We had been married, I think, about 8 years. No, it was less, six years. And I had 4 children in a little over 5 years, 4 daughters. And I sent Ray and 3 of the girls. Ray wanted to show her the kids to her mother, and they went to Israel for 6 months. And I stayed home with my youngest daughter, who was less than 2 years old. And my aunt, who lived next door to us, took care of her. She had no children. And that was it. And Ray and I have been back 4 times to Israel.
So how do you sum up your experience with the creation of the State of Israel?
I'm sorry.
How do you sum up your experience with the creation of the State of Israel, your participation?
I'm very proud of it. I think it's great, and I wish I could, if I could. I've got free room and board. My sister-in-law has been trying to get me to come there for years since her husband passed away. They were here, and we were very close. And she was from Romania. I talk to her every other month or so. She calls me, or I call there and find out what's going on. And Ray got half a dozen, come here, half a dozen cousins in Israel that we're very, very close with. And I'd like to get back there just to see what's going on, interested in how the country is progressing.
Neal, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you feel that we missed or something?
I'll probably think about it tonight in bed. That's my nemesis. I think too much at night.
Me too.
My wife passed away in '09, 9 years ago,
Yeah.
and nobody has ever interested me, and it's a bed at night alone is a hell of a thing.
And meantime, you went into the construction business. When you got moved back here, you got involved in
Oh yeah.
as a profession. Did you ever finish your degree as an engineer?
No.
No.
No, never finished it. Just learned a lot after being 50 years in the
Yeah.
business,
Yeah.
and I always owned property.
Yeah.
That's some good friends of my dad's were very politically up in in Missouri, and when Ray wanted to take the kids, her passport was revoked because of something to do with the fighting and everything that was happening over there. And I told, I did a lot of work for these two men, and I told them their problem. They said, don't worry about it. And they talked to Senator Symington. And next thing I knew, everything was okay. She got her passport settled, and then we got a letter saying it was issued in by mistake. And they said, you have the passport? And I says, yeah. Symington told my friend, then tell him to keep it and forget it, and go ahead and let her go. And she went.
All right, Neal. I think we're done. I think we got what we needed.
Okay. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it very, 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 very much.
Let me
Hold on,
show
we're gonna
you
stop. We're gonna
a couple of things.